So what I would like to start with Minister Saab, because I think is on a tight schedule. If you recall, sir, when you took office, PBC delegation came and we gave some recommendations, both short term, medium term, long term. And I remember you saying that we have about 23 items which we are working on. I think Langrial Saab was the secretary at that time. So if the overall objective is to have reliable and competitive cost power to not only industry but the general consumer as well, can you identify like 3, 4 top items which you decide that you want to tackle? Obviously, it's a long list, but which you want to tackle first, and where are we on those, and what you hope to achieve in the next couple of years?
Ruhail Saab, thank you so much for inviting me over at this prestigious forum. I've been here before. I think it was last year. I was here last year in the same hall, and we had again discussed reforms. Well, the first thing I tried to do when I came into the ministry was to ask 3 very basic questions. Are we resilient enough technically? Is the power sector resilient enough technically to absorb and bear any disruptions within the entire sector? The answer was no, absolute no. It wasn't a complete no. We were good enough, but we were not good enough as per the international standards and whatever we required in the power sector. The next question was, are we financially resilient enough to absorb the high costs of fuel and any financial disruptions like devaluation of the rupee that completely broke the backbone of the power sector and got the capacity payments to skyrocket, and higher interest rates that did the same to it, and hence the increase in the price of energy. And the answer was again no. And the third and the most important was, is the governance structure in the power sector and the regulatory framework and the regulatory authority, are these 3 very important components of governing the power sector, are they resilient enough, and are they strong enough, and are they capable enough to steer the power sector towards efficiency? And the answer was again no. I think there is a huge space that some of it we have been able to assume in terms of improvement. The rest is going to, take some time, and Pakistan is going to be moving towards that. We are in the middle of doing that. So once we did that, we listed down a list of reforms that we thought were very important. Danial Saab ne just asked a question, when would the reforms actually happen? Reforms, in my humble opinion, is an ongoing process. But as far as the power sector is concerned, we have been through some very important reforms. They need to take effect now, and they would take effect, inshallah, in the very near future. And I'd like to, there are about 28 odd reforms that we have already taken. One of them is the introduction of the competitive energy market, which should be rolled out by January or February this year, within the next few months. The other is the depoliticization of the power sector economy as far as the distribution sector is concerned. These were painful reforms. Us politicians and the political economy used to revolve around that. There was a 580+ billion rupee political economy and inefficiency around that, which we've been able to improve. Then there was the circular debt management, which we have been able to reduce to a great extent. Then there were the IPP negotiations. I'm sorry, I know some of the investors might say, oh, your policies are not consistent enough, and in the middle of it you go ahead and start negotiating with the same people who you have signed investment agreements with. But the basis of those agreements was not transparent and competitive enough for them to sustain and pull throughout the life of those agreements. Someday when the government wakes up, it finds enough space to harvest for the betterment of the people and the sustainability of the sector also. So with a very heavy heart, we had to sit down and renegotiate some of the terms of the IPPs that existed in Pakistan that on our asking had kindly invested into the country, but we did find enough fault lines for us to actually put into order. The other was the early retirement of inefficient plants. The other thing that happened in the past few years, and we are actually proud of that, but now it's become scary because of the grid instability factor that's coming in, is our renewable energy share of our entire grid. And we should be actually proud as a nation. The Australians were boasting the other day, that their grid has produced 40% clean energy last year. We've done 55% clean energy last year. Hydel is also clean energy, and we're actually proud of the fact that Pakistan has already been through a solar revolution. Do we know that there are 19,000 megawatts of solar energy installed in the system today, off and on grid? And this is also bringing about a huge amount of the pressure on the people who are on the grid and are just using grid power. So we need to have net metering regulations. Another very painful part of the reform, that we have anchors and news reporters and everybody who has a voice in this country has a net metering solution in their house or in their office or in their industry, and they've done it for a good purpose because the price of power was expensive. But I think those regulations need to be improved to a point where it still makes business sense for the investor and yet is not a burden on the rest of the consumers. So better governance in distribution companies, competitive markets. IGSEP itself, उन्होंने कहा अभी जहाज़ेब साहब ने कहा that the government needs to pull out of some parts of some sectors. I mean, we were the only buyers of power in the past. The introduction of the competitive markets means that no more power being bought by the government ever in the future. So competitive markets and buyers and sellers would be trading energy amongst themselves. So just the fact, I mean, for the first time in our country's history, and these are reforms, Mr. Daria, that have already happened. For the first time in Pakistan's history, there has been a proper planning process through which our future power acquisition would be in place after the proper due diligence of the entire system. It's the first time that our IGSEP has been overlaid by the transmission expansion plan, which would ensure that the transmission constraints are taken into account when you want to buy power and want to even get the competitive players to actually put plants in different parts of the transmission system to be traded and wheeled across. The wheeling charge is not ideal, whatever is going to be determined, but it's a big step, it's a big improvement, and we've extracted the standard cost of capacity payments from the wheeling part of it. I could also list down, and if you give me another opportunity, I'd like to quickly run through the rest of the reforms. Another very important thing, the ministry never used to go through processes of review of the regulator's decisions. It was just a given, irrespective of whether the regulator had the capacity to do whatever determinations it was coming out with, irrespective of the fact whether the regulator or other parts of the governance structure were influenced by X, Y, or Z. This sector was burdening the exchequer with a huge amount of money that we could not afford. Absolutely not. And we could not have been able to sustain ourselves. Just can you imagine an inefficient multi-year tariff regime being now implemented for the future privatized distribution companies? This sector would cripple in a year. You would not have any distribution company actually survive, and the Q block actually survive with the kind of subsidies that we have to give out in the form of uniform tariff subsidies. So these are big steps that the ministry has already been able to take, and we hope that we do harvest and are able to have trimmed the inefficiencies to a point where the power sector can grow in the future, inshallah. Sorry for the long intervention.
No, it's okay. I'll just build on a couple of points which you mentioned. So CTBCM, your target is about 800 megawatts in 5 years. Sounds a bit not too ambitious. And secondly, who do you envisage? Obviously, there are rules and regulations, but in your mind, who will be because there are a lot of industrial buyers, but who will be an eligible seller? Because I believe those existing plants, which have been either terminated or their take-or-pay revised, are not eligible to participate. So are you expecting new renewable capacity to come in to participate in the CTBCM? What is in your mind as far as this
Well, I
particular...
think the numbers say that most probably it's going to be renewable energy because that's the most cost effective. 800 megawatts might not be a very ambitious target. The entire BPC community the bulk purchases are about 3,000 plus megawatts, I believe. So 800 out of that is a very conservative but a cautious way to go about it. I've got grid stability issues to take care of. And we've had very serious and extensive discussions with the World Bank, Asian Development Bank, the IMF and everybody else. 800 megawatts is not a number that can't change. We would see the response of it. We would like to expand it to a lot more megawatts than what we have in our mind, but we want to do it in a very responsible manner. It's not just to save the grid and socialize the entire cost of it, but we would want to go about it in a gradual manner. The sooner we can do it, the better. So 800 megawatts over 4 or 5 years is not the target. It could be 800 megawatts in the next couple of years. Let's see what the first 200 megawatts part of the auction entails. And the auction is not for revenue generation at all. It is for transparency. So whoever I know in the industry comes up to me and asks me to allow them to go off the grid and to be able to wheel, say, 50 megawatts, who am I to make that decision? So the auction part is just to assess who is the first company or entity who gets to wheel these 200 megawatts.
So, but the question about allowing existing players to still participate in the bidding process for the wheeling charges?
Yes, all BPCs would be able to strike an understanding with the competitive suppliers, and the competitive suppliers would be the ones who will actually bid for this auction.
Just moving on the net metering, there have been some decisions and rollback and things like that. So can you just update where we are on the list?
There haven't been any decisions so far, unfortunately. I've been trying to hit my head against the wall for the past 8 to 9 months. Net metering regulations are not what they should be in Pakistan today. Yes, in 2017-18, when I was the minister for a year, we did decide to encourage people to get onto net metering systems and invest into solar systems. But I think now the market has grown beyond that. Pakistan is one of the best models of solar distributed generation coming onto the system, and even off-grid. Off-grid is a lot more than on-grid. On-grid is about 6,000 megawatts. Off-grid is a very conservative estimate, is about 12 to 13,000 megawatts.
When can we expect
They are
decision?
making windfall profits. That's a burden on the rest of the grid. We cannot allow that to happen in the future. And I hope we have the political will and are able to bear the pain of such economic reform in the very near future. And there is going to be hue and cry about it in the newspapers and in the talk shows. Oh, solarization ko ye log encourage nahi kare and all that. But I think we shouldn't pay any attention to that and go ahead with it as soon as
So
possible.
when do you think you'll be able to come up?
I don't know. I'm not in the Jumi, but hopefully in the very near future.
Okay.
Hopefully in the very near future, sir.
You mentioned about the improvement in the distribution companies, right? Can you give some more, specific, maybe was it geographically?
They improved on the recovery part of it the most. The losses haven't come down to that extent. But this year we are focusing on trying to reduce the losses of the distribution companies. I think the boards have been able to play a very important role. I've tried not to manage distribution companies from the power division at all. It's not my job. I haven't ever run a utility company in my life, nor has my secretary, nor has the additional secretary. So we've tried to bring into place a board and some board members who have been able to do a good job. And wherever we haven't been able to do it because of political compulsions, they have not been able to do a good job at all. Companies from Sindh, HESCO and SEPCO, absolutely pathetic still after 18 months of me being the power minister, and I acknowledge that and I accept that, and we hope that in the near future we can bring into place some board members there who could actually make a difference. I mean, boards do matter. Even in the private sector, if you have a company, a privatized utility company who does not have an effective board and an assertive one and a fair and transparent one, and if there are issues amongst shareholders within the board, the company cannot perform. And we've seen that happen in Pakistan.
Yeah, but I think as long as you have government nominees on the board, I think psychologically the management then tends to look at them for cues on how to perform or whatever rather than the private sector board. Shouldn't you make it, I mean, that could be an alternative provincialization or privatization, that would be an
We are
alternative.
shareholders, ji, so I think it's our responsibility, but unfortunately the government nominees have not been able to play a proactive role in the past. Now the finance minister and us both are actually working together, and we've encouraged our nominees to be more proactive on the boards at the cost of some criticism coming on to us. But I think when the private sector people are also not performing, then the government needs to take care of its shareholders' interest and needs to play a more proactive role. We are wanting to put into place an environment where there is minimum government interference, and I hope and pray that we do not own and manage these companies in the very near future. So privatization was another reform, sir. I think it's all up to the privatization commission. For the first time in our history, the power division has been able to reach a point where we are completely prepared. All conditions precedent to privatization are fulfilled, and the privatization advisor and the minister needs to now go through those transactions and get people like yourselves to look at Pakistan and invest yourselves. I'm sorry that I'm the only one speaking, but you can ask me to keep quiet whenever you want. There's one very important thing. I'm not expecting any FDI to come into the power sector in the very near future. I think on the national transmission side alone, Ruhail Saab, the situation is scary. We have constraints that we need to invest into immediately, as of yesterday. Asian Development Bank and the World Bank, all these banks are ready to finance us, but we don't have the rupee cover. We don't have space in the PSDP to convert those dollars coming in into rupees. There's a horrible system out there. You need some kind of rupee cover to translate these loans into spending in Pakistan. So I've also asked the PPC, and I had a very extensive meeting with you and Javed Saab, and I would really encourage you people to look at these projects and also the distribution companies. Please do not hold us responsible for the recent IPP negotiations. Do not be scared of that. That happened because there wasn't a competitive process that took place at the time. There was cost-plus regimes and bad governance structures in place. If you have a proper, transparent, competitive process that has been that has held your hand through the transaction, these things cannot happen in the future. Let me give you the example of the IT and telecom part. When I auctioned back in 2004 the GSM license and the frequency spectrum at that time, has there been a change in the structure of those transactions ever again? Hasn't there been enough competition to get consumers to actually benefit and the companies to do the same? So I think a competitive process which we would like you to author yourselves and propose to us is something that is much required for the confidence of the local investor.
One last question before I move on. You mentioned about the power division actually challenging NEPRA decision. This is probably in the case of KE. Now you're bringing a lot of more distribution companies for privatization, irrespective of the merits of the revised petition or whatever. I think the signaling is such that if the tariff can change in a matter of months, then how does a investor who tries to take over a disco will react to that?
It doesn't change in a matter of months. Tariffs are multi-year. They're 5 to 7 years on an average. And if the regulator and the regulatory process is transparent, and if the regulator has capacity enough and transparency enough, investors don't have anything to worry about. KE's multi-year tariff was actually delayed for 2 years. Incapacity of the regulator. We're also looking at changing and amending the NEPRA Act itself. The regulator needs to be not controlled, but there needs to be some kind of an accountability of what the determinations have been, what has been the quality of those determinations, what kind of people come on to the authority. Just because there is a provincial representation required from each province, that should not and cannot be the criteria anymore. Yes, the provincial representation needs to be there, but maybe in the form of a supervisory board, not in the form of members who are actually digging deep into the technical part of very complex financial models and making a decision on the basis of that. So we are trying to put into place a much improved environment for both the regulator and the policy maker to make good headway in the future.
Thank you. Dr. Arshad, you heard the minister about the reform process they are doing. Do you want to add on to that?
Thank you very much. Happy to be on the panel, and kudos to Minister Saab. This is probably one of the most difficult ministries he is especially handling, and handling it well. I would like to maybe, rather than, the reforms are going well, I think they are on the right track, but I think there are some seismic shifts happening in the energy sector that we should be aware of. And these are happening not just in Pakistan, but around the world. And we somehow, if we keep on inward looking, we probably will either miss out or maybe not be able to capitalize on it. And I think the reason, if 3 years ago, probably we probably didn't talk about it, but now probably it's important to talk about, because the solar revolution in Pakistan is a bottom-up revolution. Always there is a talk about how much solar is installed in Pakistan. There's a recent study by Pride. They estimated that the upper cap, and they use satellite data, about 33 gigawatt of solar has been installed in Pakistan. So that's of course an estimate, so it's ranged between 26 to 33. Even if you take the 26 gigawatt, in the last 2 years the maximum installations happened, that's more installation that happened in the whole continent of Africa in just 2 years. And that's of course something to be proud of, but of course it's a problem for the power sector. But the second problem, which is the most interesting problem and a challenge, and you can say where we are completely away from the world, is that almost 95% of all this installation happened downside of the meter. It's not utility, you can say scale solar. It's mostly smaller installations, ranging from maybe 2 kilowatt to maybe 2 megawatt installed by various agencies. Now, this is increasing every month. According to Pakistan Solar Association, they are installing about 1 to 1.2 gigawatt of solar every month, and they are not considering it as a good year. But there is something that's about to change again, and we'll see another acceleration of solar going into the future. So you see, the power sector is an engineering marvel across the generation, transmission, distribution, and load. It's an engineering marvel. We can say that it's humanity's one of the greatest achievements. Why we wanted this complex system to be built? Because we didn't have any storage, except when you are lucky if you have, let's say, dams or other thing, but the storage was not there. That is not true anymore. So which means that now I can store electricity whenever I like, wherever I like, and I can use it whenever I like. That storage, of course, was available. I mean, we have been hearing about storage a long time. But today the storage, so we have the levelized cost of energy, so levelized cost of storage also is another metric that we use. So that prices have gone down significantly. It's Huawei's number, the internal number is that about $100 per megawatt hour of levelized cost of storage. That was 2022. Today, it's $30. That's the amount of price reduction that is done. It's not just the price reduction, but also the number of cycles that the batteries have. So now 10,000, 12,000 cycles are there. So now with these batteries, there is going to be a massive change in the way we use electricity, we generate electricity, we store electricity. So at the Energy Institute, we did a study recently where we found that across generation, transmission, distribution, and load, there are 50 use cases of batteries that are not going to be available. Many of them today, I mean, if you look at it, they are now feasible. Some of them are not, long duration storage that are still coming, but many of them are feasible now. So there is another acceleration with the solar that we are coming. So net metering or not doesn't really matter now. The next thing is that since it's downside of the meter, people are going to create local microgrids, which in other words, if they're connected, they're called virtual power plants, but otherwise it will be local microgrid. And then you have digitalization, you have all those energy efficiency and conservation, and on top of that, you can earn carbon credits on top of it. Because, I mean, if it's not feasible, carbon credits will make it feasible. All these changes are available to the grid as well, in fact, more so. But somehow, we are still stuck in the tariff and the other discussions and not looking at these opportunities that are coming up. Especially at the distribution side, we are still living in the Stone Age. In terms of digitalization, we are still living in the Stone Age. So I think we really need to pull up our socks and start working on this new revolution. It will be painful in the short term, but probably can show the world that how decarbonization can be done. So I think
Doctor, just to build on that, how do you see, if you've done some studies, how do you see the load on the grid? Because once you drop the load on the grid, then there are other issues that come up, right? So do you think the load on the grid will continue to go down, and to what extent?
The load on the grid is a simple, you can say, tariff issue, right? The affordability issue, and of course the reliability issue. So tariff, of course, has to be rationalized, but we do not have to artificially lower the tariff to create another white elephant of circular debt or anything. Tariffs can be improved. Our tariffs are still in the 1960s. I mean, now with digitalization, you can create so many interesting tariff models that can benefit both the grid and the consumer at the same time. So I think if I would like one reform to be made, and immediately is the tariff reform, not talking about tariff lowering or increasing, but through digitalization, how can we have tariff that are maybe even real time? There maybe, I mean, the solar energy that's available, just capitalize on it. And maybe it is going to maybe save the grid in the short to medium term.
Dr. Saab की बात पे एक just one small intervention, sir. I think when the battery storage actually kicks in, the duck curve that we are in, and it's no longer a duck curve now. In the daytime, it's almost become like a snake. So that, well, the lower part of the duck curve is getting deeper. So there are instances where the cost of, well, the fuel cost or the variable cost is much lower. Dr. Saab, maybe that's about what the trend might be like. So the people, so your, and in the peak hours, when there is no solar, the cost of the variable cost could actually come down because people would be having stored electricity for them to use themselves. We've also started looking at the concept of virtual grids. Okay, so there are battery storages across the grid owned by people. So the concept of virtual grids and acquiring power from them at a certain point in time, which will bring down the overall fuel cost or the variable cost of the grid, are also into consideration. We have also started very seriously looking at shifting at least the industry, the big users of power, towards more of increasing the fixed component part of their load. And this is not going to be mandatory, or this is not going to be the only option. So we might give the industry an option. If you want to stick to this regime, you're much more welcome to do that. But if you want to pay more fixed costs for the sanction load that you have, and if you want to shift to a regime where we have hourly or at least 6 hourly or 12 hourly or whatever, so there would be a different variable cost that you will be paying in the daylight hours, and a different one in the evening, and then a different one, say, late at night. So the time of use would be a very important factor in the near future. So we are looking at being innovative enough, like the rest of the world is, in trying to bring into place a tariff structure that would ensure a recovery for us in any case and not involve any subsidies, but would also encourage the industry to use more power at a certain time and hedge that part of it with the increased amount of fixed costs they pay for the sanction loan.
Right.
So we are going to do that, other than the surplus package which we've already announced.
Right. Ali, since you're operating some renewable IPPs, what are the latest trend in the renewables, and can they replace base load very soon?
So there is this discussion that's going on the battery prices coming down. However, I think a very important element of that, which one must keep in mind, is that battery is not a source of generation. Battery is just a storage device. So you in any case need a source of generation. So at Sapphire Textiles, Nadeem Sahib is here, we conducted a study and we wanted to find the sweet spot that if we somehow mix our grid with some of the renewables and with battery there in place as well, then what that sweet spot would be. And that sweet spot was about 30%, 30 to 40% of the total load was the sweet spot, and beyond that it was becoming very expensive because to charge the batteries you were required to install a lot of additional panels because there was no wind there. Situation improves a little bit where you have hybrid, where you have wind and solar both, and then when you put the battery there, then situation improves a little bit. But there is definitely this limitation of cost also at the same time. Another development which is taking place is that the sodium ion batteries are also now making their way into this whole value chain of storage devices, and the cost there, the numbers there are substantially cheaper than the lithium-ion battery. So that's another thing which will have an impact on the renewable space.
Okay. Danish, I'll just turn to you since you are now. What developments are happening there, and what do you think will be the EV load on the grid or incremental demand from the EV space?
Sure. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Thank you, Ruhail Sahib, and thank you, PVC, for inviting me. I think when we talk about electric vehicles, I'll just do an extension and I'll include what we call new energy vehicles, which are EVs plus PHEVs and some other technologies. And what we are seeing in Pakistan is what I would call a step revolution. Something that we probably saw in Pakistan in the telecom sector, where the growth was not linear. When the cellular networks came on, the growth and the penetration was not linear. So I think we are at that cusp where I feel we see that NEV adoption would be also a step revolution. What that means for us is a couple of things. Of course, NEVs are at a cross section of three sectors that I would say. Of course, you have the transportation sector on one side, you've got the energy sector, what we're discussing right now, and of course the environment as well. Because right now, as we see, from an environment perspective, transportation is contributing about 43% to the air pollutants that we have in the country. And also, if we look at the transportation sector, we see that the fuel import bill is now predominantly for road transport. So when we talk about the NEV adoption in Pakistan, we're talking about impacting the environment positively. We're talking about impacting the economy positively as well by reducing our import bills. And also on the flip side, we are looking at new technologies coming in. We are also in the process of setting up a local assembly plant, which then has a trickle-down impact on future localization as well. So a point that was being made earlier about manufacturing and increasing the economic activity in Pakistan, I think with NEV adoption, it is these three sectors that get impacted. To your question about the load on the grid, I think there are a couple of things, of course, when we talk about NEVs, charging infrastructure becomes very pertinent. But more so, if we talk about not just the charging infrastructure that needs to come in place, but also, as I was talking about, when you have that adoption, when you have local assembly and localization increasing, then your demand centers also increase. So I think it's more about grid utilization impact, if you ask me. We do not anticipate burden on the grid, but probably more utilization.
Mr. Saab, one question I think everybody wants to is, are there anything else, any initiatives where the industrial tariff would actually come down going forward, in addition to the package which you recently announced?
Industrial tariff, the Ruhail Sahab, it's already reduced by about 16 rupees, but it's not good enough. So you're at about 14 odd cents right now as we speak. I think that needs to come down further. We're looking at different options, maybe a debt swaps of some sort or whatever else. Well, I think the capacity and the fixed part of the cost of electricity, I don't know if the Honorable Finance Minister would agree to that or not, but we need to fiscalize it to some extent. We are inefficient. We are inefficient, but we're not that inefficient. So please do realize that in countries like the US and others, where there's more part of innovation in your manufacturing sector and in other intellectually strongly sectors of the economy, the cost of power, even, I mean, in the US, data centers are also running at 13, 14 cents per kilowatt hour. But here in Pakistan, we do need to, our target is to try to come down to about 9 to 9.5 cents for the industry not to have that as an excuse not to grow. The other thing is, I would just very quickly, since I have to go for a Intergovernmental Commission meeting with the Energy Minister of Russia at the Summer Club, I'll just give you very quickly. So we have reduced industrial tariff. We've gone through early retirement of fossil fuel plants. We have sold redundant government-owned plants that were a burden of 7.5 billion rupees in salaries being paid to the employees. We have gone through a reduction in circular debt. There are customer-centric and more transparent systems like 118 and Apna Meter Apni Reading. Net metering regulations we are looking forward to that. NTDC, the biggest constraint in the system, is being restructured as we speak. It's been split up into two companies, NGC and IDMIC. There has been a solarization of tubewells in Balochistan. So the political economy was taking an advantage of 60 billion rupees a year by not paying for the electricity that they were consuming from the grid, adding the burden onto you, all of you. There has been an electrification of strategic areas like the GB and Gwadar. We are going through the process of actually trying to get the private sector to put up a plant in Gwadar for more reliable power. Vigilant new mechanisms on regulatory decisions. A reduction in the EV tariff. Much before all the noise that you heard on the EV sector, I think it was about a year ago that we brought down the tariff from 71 to about 38 rupees. IGSEP, NEPRA Act amendments. Oh, by the way, Ruhail Sahab, there's another very big step that we are about to take. We are going to author the first integrated energy plan. Pakistan doesn't have an integrated energy plan. So the petroleum division is working in its own silo. We are doing that in our own. The transport sector in the provinces is taking its own direction. There hasn't been an effort to try to get all the stakeholders in place and have a proper integrated energy plan. The power division has taken that responsibility, and we are getting all these stakeholders together to have an integrated energy plan authored within the next 1 year, which would
I think
set
since we are
direction.
running out of time, maybe we can just take
Well,
one or
thank
two
you.
questions from the crowd and then we
Yeah,
wrap
just
it up.
half a question if you don't mind.
Ji. Ji Mushtaq sir.
مشتاق صاحب بہت سخت سوال کریں گے سر.
سر سوال یہ ہے کہ آپ نے یہ کہا کہ جو آئی پی پیز کے ساتھ ہوا ہے وہ انویسٹر جو ہے اس سے ڈرے نہ اور ڈسکلوز کریں. ایک تو یہ پوچھنا چاہ رہا ہوں کہ تم کیسے آئیں گے کہ موجودہ ایک ہی ڈسکلوز ہے جو اس کو الیکٹڈ کر رہے ہیں آپ نے انڈیکیٹ کیا تھا اس کے بورڈ میں جو اس وقت بھیگا مشکل چل رہی ہے اور جو انویسٹرز ہیں وہ بھی پریشان ہیں, جو مینجمنٹ ہے وہ بھی پریشان ہے. تو وہ نئی جو آپ آرگنائزیشن کریں گے وہ کس طرح لوگوں کے انکم جو بیس کے اوپر.
مشتاق صاحب دیکھیے یہ ایک ہو گیا نا سوال.
چائنیز کے ساتھ آپ نے جو کر لیا, چائنیز کے ساتھ آپ کیوں نہیں کر پائے, اس میں کیا مجبوری ہے؟
میں بتاتا ہوں. ایک تو چائنیز کا ہمارا ایک سی پیک کے فریم ورک کے اندر انویسٹمنٹ ہوئی ہے, ٹھیک ہے. آئی پی پیز کے ساتھ کسی سی پیک کے فریم ورک کے اندر انویسٹمنٹ نہیں ہوئی تھی. تو چائنیز کے ساتھ ہم ڈیٹ ری پروفائلنگ اور چیزوں کے اندر اور ایل پی آئیز کو ویو آف کرنے کے اندر سیکولر ڈیٹ کی اگر ان کو پیمنٹ چاہیے ان کو بھی ایل پی آئیز ویو آف کرنی پڑیں گی جس طرح باقی آئی پی پیز کو کرنی پڑیں گی. تو چائنیز کے ساتھ کوئی اسپیشل ہمارا ارینجمنٹ اور انڈرسٹینڈنگ نہیں ہے اور نہ ہی کسی کو اس قسم کی چیز دی جا رہی ہے. آئی پی پیز کے ساتھ جو ری نیگوسیشنز ہوئی تھی, میں اسی لیے کانفیڈنس سے بات کر رہا ہوں کہ اگر ایک کمپیٹیٹو پروسیس ہوتا, اگر ہم گورننس کرنے والوں میں اس وقت اتنی عقل ہوتی اور کاسٹ پلس رجیمز کے اندر اور اپنی مرضی سے ریگولیٹر انیفیشینٹ ٹیرفز جو بعد میں بوجھ بننے تھے, اگر if they won't have gone through those inefficient processes یہ نہ ہوتا. 2004 کے اندر ٹیلی کام پالیسی بھی آئی نا, اس کے اندر بھی ایک آکشن پروسیس ہوا نا, کمپیٹیٹو پروسیس تھا. کس نے بولا اس کے اوپر؟ اس وقت $5 ملین کے اوپر ایک کمپنی کو ادھر اس کا فریکوینسی اسپیکٹرم ملا تھا, وہ اٹھا کے $295 ملین کے اوپر کیا. اس کے بعد نہ انہوں نے کمپلینٹ کیا, نہ ہم نے کمپلینٹ کیا, نہ کنزیومرز نے کمپلینٹ کیا. آپ کئی کی بات کریں, میرا کوئی کئی کے بورڈ کے اندر جھگڑوں سے سروکار نہیں ہے. شیئر ہولڈرز کا مسئلہ ہے. پورا 1.5 سال we've been asking the shareholders, SIFC has been trying to help them to sit across a table and resolve their issues. میرا یہ مسئلہ ہے کہ میں نے پرائیویٹائزیشن سے پہلے اور ڈسکوز کی, اس سیکٹر کے اندر وہ خوابوں کی دنیا کے اوپر بیس کر کے انویسٹرز کو نہیں لے کے آنا تھا کہ 5 سال کے بعد وہ پھر ڈس اپوائنٹ ہوئے. ریئلسٹک ٹرمز کے اوپر لے کے آنے جس میں ان کی بھی بھلائی ہے اور ہماری بھی سسٹینیبلٹی ہے. میری خواہش یہ ہے کہ ایس سی سی پی کے لاز کے مطابق ایک پبلکلی لسٹڈ کمپنی اپنی بورڈ کے الیکشن صحیح وقت پہ کروائے. بھائی یہ حکومت کی کمپنی تو نہیں ہے, پرائیویٹ سیکٹر کی ہے نا. پبلکلی لسٹڈ کمپنی کو بورڈ کے الیکشن صحیح وقت پہ ہونے نہیں چاہیے. اگر کسی شیئر ہولڈر کا کسی دنیا کی کسی کونے کے اندر کوئی ایشو ہے آپس میں, خدا کرے وہ جلدی ریزالو ہو جائے. حکومت کا تو شوق نہیں ہے اپنا سی او بٹھانے کا, ہمیں تو اپنے اچھے سی اوز نہیں ملتے تو ہم ان کے لیے کہاں سے بٹھائیں گے. سو دس کمپنی نیڈس ٹو ڈو مچ بیٹر for it to provide reliable and assured power at good tariffs. ابھی تو شکر کریں کہ یونیفارم ٹیرف کی رجیم ہے, ورنہ کراچی کے لوگ پتہ نہیں کس روپے پر یونٹ پے کر رہے ہوتے اور حیدرآباد کے اور سکھر کے. By the way, uniform tariff is another big evil in the system, which we might not have the courage to go through this reform, but ultimately the power sector cannot. We are disincentivizing efficiencies in the distribution sector by holding on to the uniform tariff system. But we are planning to do so for the near future and the mid-term future, تاکہ ایک دفعہ ذرا اس کے اندر اسٹیبلٹی اور ذرا ایک میچورٹی ڈسٹریبیوشن سیکٹر کے اندر آ جائے. اور دوسری بات ہے مشتاق صاحب, میں یہ بات ڈنکے کی چوٹ پہ 100 دفعہ کہوں گا کہ جو انیفیشنسیز ہیں, چاہے وہ انویسٹر کے فائدے میں ہوں یا ہمارے فائدے میں ہوں, انیفیشنسیز ہٹانے سے کبھی بھی ہم نہیں کترائیں گے, کیونکہ 10 منٹ کی 10 آرٹیکلز آ جائیں گے کہ تم انویسٹر کو بھگا رہے ہو. اگر یہ کئی کا جو اپنا معاملہ بتایا ہے, یہ ہم معاملات کو درست کاریں جس طرح ہر پرائیویٹ سیکٹر کا اینٹیٹی چاہے گی کہ درست ہو. نہیں سسٹین میں کر سکتا 100 ارب روپے سالانہ اپنے ٹیکس پیئر کا پیسہ دے کے کسی کو, بیکاز وہ لوگ ایفیشنسی اپنی کمپنی کے اندر نہیں لے کے آ رہے. میری پبلکلی اونڈ اینڈ مینجڈ کمپنیز کے اندر 100% ریکوری آئی ہے کہ الیکٹرک کے ایریاز کے اندر جہاں 700 یونٹ سے اوپر ہے وہاں آپ کے ریکوری ریٹ 65 اور 70% ہے. وہی اگر آپ صرف 90% پہ اوپر لے کے لے جاتے ہیں تو مائی ملٹی ایئر ٹیرف میکس پرفیکٹ سینس. ہم نے اپنے بینکرز بھائیوں کو بھی بیٹھ کے ایکسپلین کیا, ان کی مہربانی, انہوں نے ہمیں آڈینس دی کہ ان کی کوئی ڈیٹ سروسنگ کو اور کسی چیز کو اس ایم آئی ٹی کے اوپر سے کوئی ایفیکٹ نہیں ہوگا. رسپانسبل لوگ ہیں سر, ہم تو چاہتے ہیں کہ چاہے اس کا ایک انویسٹر ہو یا دوسرا ہو, میرا رشتہ دار تو نہیں لگتا. ہم تو ایس سی سی پی کے قوانین کے تحت ان کمپنیز کو آگے بہتری کی طرف لے کے جانا چاہ رہے ہیں.
One last question, I think. جی مصدق صاحب, last question.
جی صاحب, I think ایک تو آپ نے پوائنٹ آؤٹ کر دیا, لیولائز ٹیرف از a burden on lot of industries. تو آپ لوگ کرتے ہیں. دوسرا ایک since the finance minister is here, I think تھوڑی پولیٹیکل ول کی ضرورت ہے جو برڈن انڈسٹری کا کم کرنے کے لیے. جو ہم کراس سبسیڈائز کر رہے ہیں لائف لائن کنزیومر کو, that subsidy should be transferred to the provinces and not the industry. That can remove a lot of burden without doing anything else. تو اس کے اوپر آئی تھنک حسین صاحب ادھر ہیں.
سر وہ کراس سبسڈی کی تو بات کیا, سر وہ کراس سبسڈی تو بات کی بات ہے. میں آپ کو صرف ایک ایگزامپل دیتا ہوں. We've run the numbers. اگر آپ 1.2 یا 1.3 ایئرس کے پے بیک پیریڈ سے نیٹ میٹرنگ کے جو کنزیومرز ہیں, ابھی ڈاکٹر صاحب نے بات کی, یہ زیادہ میٹر نہیں کریں گے ان دا فیوچر, لیکن اس وقت کی بات کر رہا ہوں. اگر آپ نیٹ میٹرنگ کے یوزرز کو, جو ہم سب جیسے لوگ ہیں, they are not the poor of this country, they are the well off of this country. اگر ان کا پے بیک پیریڈ آپ 1.25 سال سے اٹھا کے 3.25 سال کے اوپر لے کے جاتے ہیں نا, which is a very good pay back period, تو آپ کی 200 ارب روپے کا فرق پڑتا ہے for the entire grid. 2 روپے پر کلو واٹ آور کی بجلی کی قیمت نیچے ہوتی ہے, ایک کوارٹر کے اندر ہو جاتی ہے. So the next QTA will bring in that effect. And what are we paying us people like us windfall profits for? وہ کسی نے بہت مشہور بات کی تھی کہ ایک امریکن فٹ بال ٹیم تھی جس کے اندر سارے ملینئرز ہوتے ہیں ماشاءاللہ, سب پلیئرز آتے ہیں ویری ویل آف. ان کو وہ جب تھرو کرتے ہیں تو وہ ٹرانسلیٹ نہیں کر سکتے تھے ٹو کیچز. تو اس کے کوچ نے بہت ان کو کہا کیا کر رہے ہو کیا کر رہے ہو کیا کر رہے ہو, وہ ٹھیک نہیں ہو رہے تھے. ایک دن ٹریننگ سیشن میں کوچ آفرڈ them $5 a catch. So those multi-millionaires started converting all those throws into catches. So even if it does not matter to us, the hue and cry is no, ہمارا سولر کو ڈسکریج کریں. یہ بات آپ پلیز روہیل بھائی, یہ بات آپ لوگ پی بی سی کے اندر بھی ہر جگہ اگر مناسب سامنے کہیں, اور پاکستان کسی چیز کے اوپر تو اپنے آپ سے پراؤڈ ہو. We have authored, we have gone through, whether I have authored it or not, it doesn't matter. This country has authored one of the most successful solar and renewable energy transitions in the world. So, bahut meherbani.
Thank you, thank you very much.